At my sister's engagement, she giggled into the mic. My sister's ex left her for a real woman. My mom smirked. Even he had standards. The crowd's laughter was cut short when a sharp-eyed woman slammed the mic off. My sister's fiancé's face went pale. Her gaze locked onto me, pity, a secret, and vengeance. I was hiding behind the dessert table when Lena grabbed the microphone. The worst part wasn't what she was about to say. It was that I'd heard her rehearsing it in the bathroom 20 minutes earlier. She'd been standing at the mirror, adjusting her engagement ring, practicing the delivery with different tones. Giggly first, then dramatic, finally settling on that sing-song voice she used when she wanted to sound innocent while delivering a blow. I'd been in the stall, frozen, listening to her workshop my humiliation. My sister's ex left her for a real woman, she announced now to the garden full of faces I'd known my entire life. The same neighbors who used to compliment Mom on having such sweet daughters. The same relatives who'd watched me graduate valedictorian, who'd celebrated when I got my teaching job, who'd sent sympathy cards when Dad died. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing stories about finding strength after betrayal. If you believe women deserve to know the truth about toxic relationships, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. Their laughter started small, a few chuckles from the back row where my cousins sat with their husbands. Then it spread like spilled wine across white fabric, staining everything it touched. Mrs. Henderson from next door actually slapped her knee. My own godmother covered her mouth, but her shoulders shook with suppressed giggles. I gripped the edge of the dessert table, my fingers sticky with frosting from the elaborate cake Lena had insisted on. 3 tiers, covered in roses that matched her dress, topped with figurines that looked nothing like her or James. Everything about this party was performance, including this moment. Mom stepped forward and my stomach dropped. I knew that look. The one that meant she was about to add her own commentary to make sure everyone really understood the joke. She took the microphone from Lena's manicured hand. Even he had standards, Mom said, her voice carrying across the garden with perfect clarity. She squeezed Lena's shoulder like she was congratulating her for a particularly clever observation. My youngest always did attract quality men. The words hung in the air like smoke. Quality men. As if David leaving me for his secretary was somehow proof of his good judgment rather than his cowardice. As if the 3 years we'd spent together, the weekends fixing up his house, the holidays with his family who still sent me Christmas cards, the engagement ring he'd helped me pick out for myself before he changed his mind, meant nothing. I remembered that ring now, sitting in my jewelry box at home. Too expensive to return, too painful to wear, too sentimental to throw away. David had insisted we go to 3 different stores before finding the perfect one. It has to be right, he'd said, holding my hand across the jewelry counter. This is forever. Forever lasted exactly 18 months. Aunt Carol leaned over to whisper something to her daughter, both of them glancing in my direction. I caught fragments, always too serious. No wonder he should have seen it coming. The terrible thing was they weren't entirely wrong. I had been serious. I'd talked about mortgages and retirement plans while David still wanted to go out drinking with his college friends every Friday. I'd suggested couples counseling when we started fighting about money. I'd been the one pushing for wedding dates and venue bookings. Maybe I had driven him away. Maybe his secretary, with her easy laugh and her willingness to stay late at the office without complaining about dinner plans, really was a better match. Maybe Mom was right. Maybe he did have standards I'd never measured up to. But standing there watching my family treat my heartbreak like entertainment, I realized the real problem wasn't that David had left. The real problem was that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had been waiting for this moment. They'd been storing up my failures, collecting evidence of my inadequacy, preparing for the day they could finally say what they'd always believed, that I wasn't good enough. Lena continued her speech, talking about true love and finding your person. James stood beside her, uncomfortable but silent, occasionally glancing toward where I stood. He'd always been kind to me, asking about my students, remembering my birthday. Now he looked like he wanted to disappear. The evening breeze picked up, rustling the paper lanterns Mom had hung from every tree branch. She'd spent weeks planning this party, calling it the social event of the season. She'd invited everyone. Old neighbors, distant relatives, people from her book club who barely knew Lena. Also, she could show off her successful daughter, the one who'd landed a good man and kept him. I started backing away from the dessert table, hoping to make it to the house before anyone noticed. My heel caught on the brick edging around Mom's prized rose garden and I stumbled slightly. The movement caught Lena's attention mid-sentence. Our eyes met across the garden. For just a second I saw something flicker across her face. Not quite guilt but recognition. She knew I'd heard her practicing. She knew this wasn't spontaneous cruelty but calculated humiliation. Then the moment passed and she smiled, that bright, innocent smile she'd perfected since childhood. The one that had gotten her out of trouble for breaking my toys, for borrowing my clothes without asking, for dating the boy I'd had a crush on in high school. I turned and walked toward the side gate, my heels clicking against the stone pathway Dad had laid the summer before he died. Each step felt deliberate, final. Behind me, the laughter continued, mixing with the evening sounds of suburbia. Sprinklers turning on, dogs barking, the distant hum of air conditioners working against the heat. I didn't know then that someone else had witnessed everything. Someone who would change everything. I spent the week after the engagement party grading 5th grade essays about summer vacation. Every paper seemed to mock me. Children writing about family trips, parents who loved each other, homes where people were kind. I marked them with increasingly aggressive red ink, taking out my frustration on dangling participles and run-on sentences. Thursday morning my laptop chimed with a new email. The sender's name meant nothing to me, elisecarter.designs@gmail.com, but the subject line made my coffee mug freeze halfway to my lips. You don't know me, but I know who he really is. My first instinct was to delete it. Spam, obviously. Someone had gotten my information from a mailing list, probably trying to sell me life insurance or debt consolidation. But something about the phrasing nagged at me. The specificity of who he really is rather than a generic, about your ex, or regarding David. I opened it. The email was short, professional, and completely unhinged all at once. The woman, Elise Carter, claimed to be David's wife. Not ex-wife. Current legal wife. She'd attached what looked like a marriage certificate, bank statements, and a photo of David in a tuxedo standing next to a blonde woman in white. I stared at the screen until my eyes watered. The photo was dated 2 years before David and I had even met. The marriage certificate showed a wedding date that would have made David married for the entire duration of our relationship. My hands shook as I scrolled through the attached bank records. Joint accounts. A mortgage in both their names. Credit cards with her name as the primary holder and his as an authorized user. The address was in Portland, 3 hours north of where David claimed to live alone in his bachelor pad apartment. The woman had written her story in bullet points, like she was presenting evidence in court. How she'd supported David through his entrepreneurial phase when his marketing business failed. How she'd taken out loans in her name to keep them afloat. How she'd worked double shifts at her graphic design firm while he figured things out. How one morning she'd woken up to find him gone. Clothes, car, even the coffee maker they'd received as a wedding gift. She'd hired a private investigator. Found out about the apartment he'd rented using money from their joint account. Found out about me. Found out about his job at the advertising firm. The same job he'd told me was his first real career opportunity. The one that had finally made him ready to settle down. I read the email 17 times. Then I walked to my kitchen and threw up in the sink. The next part of her message was what really destroyed me. She'd been following David's social media, trying to understand who he'd become. She'd seen photos of him with me at company parties, weekend trips, family dinners. She'd watched our relationship unfold through his Instagram posts like some twisted reality show. He used the same lines on you, she wrote. The same restaurant for your first anniversary that he took me to for our first anniversary. The same vacation spot in Cannon Beach. Even the same engagement ring design. I helped him pick it out 3 years ago, thinking it was for me someday. My phone rang. Unknown number, Portland area code. I answered without thinking. Sarah. The voice was steady, controlled. This is Elise Carter. I sent you an email. This is insane, I managed. This can't be real. I know how it sounds. I've been trying to figure out how to approach you for months. I saw the engagement announcement in your local paper. Your sister sent it to the community newsletter. It got picked up online. When I realized he was planning to marry someone else while still married to me, I knew I had to act. Why now? Why me? There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, more human. Because I've been where you are. I've been the woman who everyone whispers about, who everyone thinks wasn't good enough to keep her man. And because what he's doing to you and to your sister, it's not just cruel. It's criminal. She suggested we meet. Coffee somewhere public, somewhere I'd feel safe. She could bring documentation, answer questions, prove everything she'd told me. Or I could hang up, delete the email, and pretend this conversation never happened. I chose the coffee shop downtown, the one with mismatched furniture and terrible acoustic music. Tuesday afternoon when the lunch crowd would be gone but the place wouldn't be empty. Neutral territory. She arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather portfolio that looked expensive and professional. I recognized her immediately from the wedding photo, though she looked older now, more tired. Her blonde hair was shorter, styled in a way that suggested she'd stopped caring about impressing anyone. She wore simple black pants and a gray sweater that brought out the sharpness in her blue eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. Her voice was the same one from the phone, controlled, measured, like she'd practiced this conversation. She ordered black coffee and opened her portfolio without ceremony. More documents, more photos, more evidence of a life I'd never known existed. Their wedding album. Lease agreements. Holiday cards addressed to Mr. and Mrs. David Morrison. "He told me his parents were dead," I said, staring at a Christmas photo of David with an older couple in matching sweaters. "They live in Vancouver. They think I abandoned their son." Elise turned the page to reveal more family photos. "They sent me a card last Christmas asking me to stop being stubborn and come home." The coffee shop soundtrack shifted to some indie folk song about heartbreak and healing. The irony was suffocating. A college student at the next table was highlighting textbook passages about constitutional law, completely absorbed in a world where rules mattered and people faced consequences for their actions. "What do you want from me?" I asked. Elise closed the portfolio and looked directly at me. For the first time since she'd arrived, her composure cracked slightly. "I want him to face what he's done. Not just to us but to your sister. She doesn't know she's about to marry a man who's already married. In most states that makes their ceremony invalid and him guilty of fraud. She won't believe me. My family won't believe me. They'll believe court documents. They'll believe a marriage certificate that predates their relationship by 2 years." Rain started hitting the coffee shop windows, turning the afternoon gray and muffled. Elise reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, her own for freelance graphic design. On the back she'd written her personal cell phone number. "Think about it," she said, standing to leave. "But don't think too long. Their wedding is in 6 weeks. She was halfway to the door when she turned back. "Sarah? What happened at that engagement party? I saw the video." My blood went cold. "What video?" "Someone posted it online. Your sister's speech, your mother's comment. It has over 50,000 views." She paused. "You deserved better than that. From all of them." Then she was gone, leaving me alone with the rain and the terrible knowledge that my humiliation had become entertainment for strangers across the internet. I sat in my car for 20 minutes after Elise left, watching the rain streak down my windshield and thinking about 50,000 strangers laughing at my family's cruelty. The video was probably still circulating, being shared in group chats and tagged with crying laughing emojis. My humiliation had become content. That night I found the video. Someone had titled it, "Sister Destroys Sibling at Engagement Party," with fire emojis. The comments were worse than I'd imagined. People calling me pathetic, ugly, desperate. Others defending me, which somehow felt just as awful. I was a cautionary tale now, a meme about family dysfunction and romantic failure. I called Elise at 11 p.m. "I'll help you," I said when she answered on the first ring. "But I have conditions." "I'm listening." "This isn't about revenge. I don't want to hurt Lena just to hurt her. I want her to know who she's marrying before she makes the biggest mistake of her life." There was silence on the other end. Then, "That's more generous than I would be. And I want my family to understand what they did to me. Not through me screaming at them or causing a scene, but through seeing the truth. The truth that they humiliated you while defending a man who was lying to everyone?" Exactly. Elise's goal was simple: stop the wedding and expose David for what he was. But she needed someone on the inside, someone who could get close enough to the family to make the revelation impossible to ignore or dismiss. She tried reaching out to Lena directly months ago, but her emails had gone unanswered. She'd even called the house once, but Mom had hung up the moment she mentioned David's name. "Your sister thinks I'm a crazy ex trying to cause trouble," Elise explained during our second meeting, this time at a diner outside town where no one would recognize us. "But your family. They'll have to listen to you." "They don't listen to me. You saw the video." "They'll listen to evidence. They'll listen to legal documents they can't argue with." The plan required me to reconnect with Lena, something I'd been avoiding since the engagement party. But 2 days later, I called her with my best impression of someone who'd processed their feelings and was ready to move forward. "Sarah." She sounded genuinely surprised. "I wasn't sure you were speaking to me. I've been thinking about what you said at the party. About moving on, finding the right person." Each word tasted like soap, but I forced them out. "Maybe you were right. Maybe David leaving was the best thing that could have happened to me." The relief in her voice was unmistakable. "Oh honey, I'm so glad you're seeing it that way. I was worried I'd been too harsh, but sometimes people need to hear the truth. I want to help with the wedding. I know I've been distant, but you're my sister. This is your big day." Lena practically squealed with excitement. "Really? Because James and I could use all the help we can get. Mom's been so stressed trying to coordinate everything, and the wedding planner keeps changing her mind about the timeline. She invited me over that weekend to help address invitations." I sat at her dining room table, writing names and addresses in my careful teacher handwriting, while she chattered about flower arrangements and seating charts. It was almost like we were kids again, working on school projects together before everything got complicated. "You know what's funny?" Lena said, sealing another envelope. "David asked James about you last week. Wanted to know how you were doing." My pen stopped moving. "He did. James told him you seemed to be doing better. David said he hoped there were no hard feelings." She laughed. "As if you'd have hard feelings about him finding his soulmate." I managed to keep writing, though my handwriting got shakier. "His soulmate. That's what he calls Rebecca. His fiancée. They're getting married next month, did you know? James and I are invited to the engagement party." She looked up at me with concern. "Is that weird for you? I mean, we don't have to go." The room tilted sideways. "He's engaged." "Oh Sarah, I'm sorry. Thought you knew. It's been all over social media." Lena pulled out her phone and showed me David's Instagram. There he was, grinning next to a brunette woman who looked nothing like either Elise or me. The caption read, "She said yes. Can't wait to start forever with my beautiful Rebecca." I excused myself to the bathroom and texted Elise immediately, "There's a third woman. He's engaged to someone else." Her response came within minutes. "I know. That's why we need to move fast." Over the next 3 weeks, Elise and I developed a system. We met twice a week. Once at the library downtown, once at a park where we could walk and talk without being overheard. She brought more evidence each time. Emails David had sent to Rebecca that were identical to ones he'd sent to both of us. Photos of the same jewelry he'd bought for all 3 women. Even restaurant receipts showing he'd taken each of us to the exact same places for special occasions. The most damaging discovery came when Elise found David's first divorce file. He'd been married before either of us knew him to a woman named Jennifer in California. The divorce had been filed but never finalized, a technicality involving unsigned paperwork and missed court dates that made all his subsequent relationships legally meaningless. "He's not just a cheater," Elise said, spreading the documents across the library table between us. "He's a serial bigamist. Jennifer, me, now your sister, and Rebecca. None of us were ever legally married to him because he never legally divorced Jennifer." I stared at the papers until the words blurred together. How many more women are there? I found traces of at least 2 others between Jennifer and me. But I can't prove those relationships involved marriage promises. We created a timeline spanning 7 years and 5 women. The pattern was always the same. David would find someone stable, someone willing to support him financially and emotionally. He'd make promises about marriage and forever while systematically draining their resources and confidence. When they started asking for real commitment or when someone better came along, he'd disappear. "Your sister's the first one where he's actually going through with a wedding ceremony," Elise noted. "Maybe because her family has money. Maybe because she's young enough to not ask hard questions about his past." The final piece of our plan came together during my 4th weekend helping with wedding preparations. Lena mentioned that David wanted to have his bachelor party the same weekend as her final dress fitting and rehearsal dinner. "He's flying to Vegas with his college friends," she said, not noticing how my hands clenched around the invitation I was addressing. "I'm a little nervous about him being around all those women, but James says I should trust him." That's when Elise and I decided on our timing. The rehearsal dinner was perfect, intimate enough that David couldn't escape, public enough that he couldn't deny the evidence, formal enough that legal documents would carry weight. Family and close friends only, which meant everyone who mattered to Lena would witness the truth. "No drama," Elise insisted during our final planning meeting. "No screaming, no confrontation. Just facts. Just documents. Just truth." I agreed, though part of me wondered if the truth would be enough. My family had already chosen their narrative about me, about David, about what had happened. Would evidence be enough to change minds that were already made up? "It has to be," Elise said when I voiced my doubts. "Because the alternative is watching your sister make the same mistake we did and then watching him do this to someone else." The night before the rehearsal dinner I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Lena trying on her wedding dress, about Mom finalizing seating arrangements, about James nervously practicing his vows. Tomorrow I would either save my sister from a terrible mistake or destroy her happiness based on the word of a stranger I'd known for 3 weeks. But when I closed my eyes I saw that video again. I heard the laughter, felt the humiliation, remembered the isolation of being the family disappointment. Maybe it was time for someone else to be the center of a scandal that wasn't their fault. The rehearsal dinner was everything Mom had dreamed of: string lights wrapped around the pergola in the country club's garden room, round tables draped in blush pink linens, centerpieces of white roses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I'd helped Lena choose the menu 3 weeks ago, back when I was still pretending to be the supportive sister who'd moved on from her heartbreak. Now I stood near the bar, a gin and tonic melting in my sweaty palm, watching David work the room like the charming businessman he'd always pretended to be. He'd flown back from Vegas that morning, tan and relaxed, telling anyone who'd listen about his epic bachelor weekend with college friends who'd probably never existed. James's parents had flown in from Minnesota. Quiet, practical people who kept glancing around the room like they weren't sure they belonged at such an elaborate affair. David had charmed them during cocktail hour, telling stories about his marketing success and his plans to take care of their son's new wife. Mrs. Peterson had actually blushed when he complimented her dress. The irony made my stomach twist. Here was a room full of people celebrating love and commitment, toasting a man who'd never legally committed to anyone in his life. Lena looked radiant in a flowing cream dress that complemented her engagement ring. The same ring design David had originally chosen with Elise. The same ring he'd probably promised to Rebecca too. She moved from table to table, accepting congratulations and compliments, completely unaware that her fiancé was scanning his phone for texts from wife number 1 and girlfriend number 3. "Ladies and gentlemen," the wedding coordinator announced, tapping her wine glass with a butter knife. "The bride would like to say a few words before dinner is served." My pulse started hammering against my ribs. This wasn't part of the plan. Elise was supposed to arrive during the cocktail hour before any speeches, before David could position himself as the victim of a crazy ex-girlfriend's delusions. Lena took the microphone from the coordinator, her smile bright enough to power the string lights. "Thank you all for being here tonight. James and I are so grateful to have our families and closest friends celebrating with us." She looked directly at me, her expression soft with what looked like genuine affection. "I especially want to thank my sister Sarah for all her help with the wedding planning. She's been through a tough time lately, but she's shown me what real strength looks like." The room murmured approvingly. Several relatives nodded in my direction. Aunt Carol even raised her wine glass in a small salute. "Some of you might remember that Sarah's relationship didn't work out the way she hoped," Lena continued, and my blood turned to ice water. "But you know what? Sometimes things fall apart so better things can fall together." A few people chuckled, thinking this was leading to some inspirational message about resilience and moving forward. "My sister's ex left her for a real woman," Lena said, and there it was. The same cruel line from the engagement party, delivered with the same bright smile. But watching Sarah handle that with such grace has reminded me how lucky I am to have found someone who truly values commitment. The room erupted in polite laughter and applause. David stood and took a theatrical bow, then blew a kiss to Lena. I wanted to disappear into the floor. Then the laughter started dying. A murmur spread through the crowd as people noticed someone new had entered the garden room. Heads turned toward the entrance, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Elise stood in the doorway wearing a navy blue dress that looked like it cost more than most people's cars. Her blonde hair was styled in a sleek chignon, her makeup was flawless, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're about to change everything. She didn't rush. She didn't shout. She simply walked through the room like she belonged there, her heels clicking against the stone floor with perfect rhythm. The jazz trio in the corner kept playing for a few more measures before they too noticed the shift in atmosphere and let their instruments fade to silence. David saw her before anyone else understood what was happening. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. He took a step backward, bumping into James, who caught his arm with concern. "Buddy, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Elise reached the front of the room and stopped directly in front of the head table where David and Lena sat with their wedding party. She opened her small clutch purse and withdrew a manila folder that somehow looked both elegant and ominous. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "I don't mean to interrupt such a lovely celebration, but there's something everyone needs to know." Lena still held the microphone, her mouth slightly open in confusion. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "My name is Elise Carter." She looked directly at David, who seemed frozen in his chair. "I'm David's wife." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the fountain outside in the courtyard, the distant sound of traffic on the main road, the soft buzz of the string lights overhead. "That's impossible," Mom said from her seat at the head table. "David's never been married." Elise opened the manila folder and held up an official-looking document. "According to the state of Oregon, we were married 3 years ago. The marriage has never been dissolved." She turned to face the room, addressing the crowd like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "David Morrison is legally married to me. This wedding ceremony would constitute bigamy, which is a felony in this state." David finally found his voice. "This is insane. Elise, what are you doing here? We divorced 2 years ago." "No, David, we didn't." Elise's voice remained calm, professional. "You left. You disappeared. You never filed the divorce papers we discussed. You're still my legal husband." She reached into the folder again and pulled out more documents, bank statements, photographs, what looked like a private investigator's report. "I have documentation showing you've been living under false pretenses, maintaining relationships with multiple women while legally married to me." James stood up slowly, his face pale. "David, is this true?" Before David could answer, Lena grabbed the microphone stand with both hands. "This is ridiculous. You're obviously some jealous ex trying to ruin our wedding. Security should remove you." "I brought copies of all the legal documents for anyone who wants to examine them," Elise said, holding up a stack of papers. "Marriage certificate, joint tax returns, mortgage documents, credit card statements. All showing that David Morrison has been my legal husband for 3 years." She placed the stack on the head table right in front of Lena. "I also have photographs of David with at least 2 other women he's been engaged to simultaneously, including one named Rebecca who believes she's marrying him next month." Mom's wine glass slipped from her fingers and exploded against the stone floor, sending shards skittering under nearby tables. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had held the room frozen. Suddenly everyone was talking at once, guests turning to each other with shocked expressions, family members demanding explanations, the wedding coordinator frantically whispering into her headset. Through the chaos, Lena's eyes found mine across the room. Her expression wasn't angry or confused anymore. It was knowing. Hurt. The look of someone who'd just realized they'd been played by more than one person. She didn't ask me why I'd done this. He didn't have to. In that moment, she understood exactly what I'd been trying to tell her about the man she'd thought she was going to marry. And for the first time since David had left me, I didn't feel like the family failure anymore. The room erupted into chaos, but Lena's voice cut through it all. She grabbed the microphone with both hands and faced the crowd with desperate determination. "This woman is lying," she announced, her voice shaking but loud. "This is obviously some jealous ex-girlfriend trying to destroy our happiness. David told me about her. She's been stalking him for months." Several guests nodded sympathetically. Aunt Margaret actually stood up and started clapping. Don't let some bitter woman ruin your special day, honey. But Elise wasn't finished. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, her movements still calm and deliberate despite the chaos around her. I thought you might say that, she said, her voice carrying over the crowd noise. So I brought audio recordings. She connected her phone to the sound system that had been playing jazz music moments before. The wedding coordinator tried to stop her, but James held up his hand. Let her play it, he said quietly. I need to hear this. David's voice filled the garden room, tinny through the speakers but unmistakably his. She's so gullible, man. Lena actually believes I've never been married before. Can you imagine? 26 years old and that naive. The laughter that followed was cruel, accompanied by clinking glasses and background bar noise. Another male voice, one I didn't recognize, responded, What about the sister? Sarah? Didn't you date her for like 3 years? God, don't remind me. 3 years of her talking about our future, planning our retirement, asking when I was going to propose. It was exhausting. At least Lena's fun. She doesn't ask questions about where I go or who I'm with. The room went dead silent. Even the fountain outside seemed to stop bubbling. Plus her family has money, David's recorded voice continued. Sarah was a teacher. What was I going to do with that salary? But Lena's trust fund, her parents' connections. This wedding is going to pay for itself through networking alone. Mom's face went ashen. She'd been so proud of the expensive venue, the elaborate menu, the guest list full of her wealthy friends. Now she understood she'd been showcasing her own daughter like a prize to be won. Lena's hands trembled as she set down the microphone. The cream dress that had made her look radiant now seemed to wash all the color from her face. Turn it off, she whispered. But the recording kept playing. David's voice describing Lena as hot but not too bright, laughing about how easy it was to convince her that his mysterious business trips were building their future together, mocking the way she practiced her wedding vows in the mirror. James walked over to the sound system and yanked the cord from the wall. The silence that followed was deafening. David finally found his voice. Those recordings are fake. AI can make anyone sound like they're saying anything now. This is a setup. The recordings were made at Murphy's Bar on 5th Street, Elise said. Last Thursday night. I can provide receipts showing you were there, credit card records, even security footage if needed. She turned to address the room again. I have similar recordings of David discussing his relationship with a woman named Rebecca, who he's also engaged to marry. She's supposed to be his wife next month in Portland. The wedding party looked like they'd been struck by lightning. Lena's maid of honor, her college roommate Jessica, pulled out her phone and started frantically typing. Oh my God, Jessica said after a moment. Lena, there's a Rebecca Morrison on Instagram. Her profile says she's getting married to David Morrison next month. She held up her phone, showing photos of David and Rebecca at what looked like an engagement party. The same poses, the same romantic captions, even the same restaurant where David had taken both Lena and me for our special occasions. Mom finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah, did you know about this? Every head in the room turned toward me. The weight of their stares, some accusatory, some confused, some pitying, should have crushed me. 6 months ago it would have. But standing there watching the truth finally emerge, I felt lighter than I had in years. I believed I was crazy for too long, I said, my voice steady and clear. I don't do that anymore. The admission hung in the air like a challenge. Mom's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She couldn't argue with me, couldn't call me fragile or delusional, because the evidence was right there in front of everyone. James walked over to David, his face a mask of controlled rage. Get out. Now. Before I call the police. David looked around the room desperately, searching for allies, for someone who might still believe his denials. But every face showed the same expression, disgust mixed with pity. Not for him but for themselves, for how completely they'd been fooled. Lena, baby, you have to believe me, he pleaded. This is all some conspiracy. Your sister's jealous because she couldn't keep me, so she's trying to destroy us. Lena picked up one of the legal documents Elise had placed on the table. Her hands shook as she read it, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Get out of my sight. Don't call me, don't text me, don't come near me or my family ever again. David left without another word, practically running through the garden room toward the parking lot. Within minutes we heard his car speeding away, tires squealing on the pavement. The aftermath felt surreal. Guests milled around uncertainly, unsure whether to leave or stay, whether to offer comfort or pretend nothing had happened. The wedding coordinator frantically made phone calls, probably canceling vendors and trying to salvage what deposits she could. 3 days later, the story exploded online. Someone had recorded Elise's confrontation and David's recorded confessions on their phone. The video went viral within hours, shared across every social media platform with captions like, "Wedding crasher exposes serial cheater," and "Hero wife saves bride from bigamist." Elise became an overnight sensation. News outlets picked up the story, casting her as the brave woman who'd saved multiple people from a dangerous fraud. She started getting interview requests, book deal offers, even movie rights inquiries. The wedding was cancelled, obviously. Vendors were surprisingly understanding once they saw the news coverage. Several even offered to donate their services to domestic violence charities in solidarity. The expensive venue became a cautionary tale about vetting your guests' backgrounds. David disappeared completely. His apartment was cleaned out within a week, his phone number disconnected, his social media accounts deleted. James hired a private investigator who discovered David had done this before. In 3 different states with at least 7 different women over the past decade. Lena moved back into Mom's house, spending her days in pajamas, scrolling through the hundreds of supportive messages she'd received from strangers who'd experienced similar betrayals. She lost 15 pounds in 2 weeks, her engagement ring sitting abandoned on her nightstand like evidence of a crime. Mom stopped hosting her book club meetings, stopped inviting friends over for dinner, stopped turning on lights during the day. The house that had once been the center of neighborhood social life became a tomb where 2 broken women nursed their humiliation in darkness. But something unexpected happened in the weeks that followed. Women started reaching out, not just to Elise but to me. Teachers from other schools who'd seen the story on local news. Former students' mothers who remembered me from parent conferences. Strangers who'd found my contact information online and wanted to share their own stories of manipulation and betrayal. Each message was a variation on the same theme. "I thought I was the only one. Thank you for showing me I wasn't crazy. Your courage helped me leave my own toxic situation." For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't the family failure. I wasn't the woman who couldn't keep a man. I was the woman who'd refused to stay broken, who'd chosen truth over comfortable lies, who'd saved her sister from making the same mistake she'd made. And finally, beautifully, everyone else knew it too. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen preparing dinner for 6 people, the most I'd entertained since David left. My apartment looked different now. I'd painted the walls a warm sage green, bought real furniture instead of the hand-me-downs I'd been living with, and hung artwork that actually meant something to me. The space felt like mine for the first time in years. Elise arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine and a folder full of legal documents that had become her signature accessory. She'd cut her hair shorter since the rehearsal dinner, and there was a lightness to her movements that hadn't been there during our secret meetings at coffee shops and libraries. "The lawyer thinks we'll have the settlement finalized by Christmas," she said, setting the wine on my counter. "David's finally agreed to sign the divorce papers in exchange for me not pursuing criminal charges." My old college roommate Maria came next, followed by 2 teachers from my school who'd become real friends after years of just being colleagues. They'd all seen the viral video, read the news articles, watched me transform from the woman who ate lunch alone in her classroom to someone who could laugh about the whole mess. The last guest surprised me. James knocked on my door at exactly 7, holding a small potted plant and looking nervous. "I hope it's okay that I came," he said. "I know things are complicated with Lena, but I wanted to thank you properly." I hadn't spoken to James since the night everything fell apart, though I'd heard through mutual friends that he'd been taking care of Lena, helping her process the trauma and rebuild her confidence. The fact that he'd driven an hour to my apartment meant something. Over dinner we talked about everything except David. Maria told stories about her new job in Portland. The teachers complained about standardized testing and shared classroom disasters that had us laughing until our sides hurt. Elise described the book deal she'd signed, a memoir about financial abuse in relationships and how women could protect themselves. "The publisher wants to include your perspective too," she said, turning to me. "You're part of the story, how you chose to help instead of staying silent. They think it could help other women in similar situations." I'd been writing again, something I hadn't done since college. Not just journaling about my feelings but real writing, Essays about gaslighting, about family dynamics, about the difference between supporting someone and enabling their delusions. The local newspaper had published 2 of my pieces, and I'd gotten emails from women who said my words had helped them recognize patterns in their own relationships. I've been thinking about that, I said. Not just the book but something bigger. A resource for women who need practical help getting out of bad situations. James leaned forward, interested. What kind of help? Financial planning, legal advice, emotional support. David wasn't just manipulating us emotionally, he was systematically destroying our financial independence. I gave him money for his business ventures that never materialized. Elise took out loans in her name. Rebecca probably did the same thing. Elise nodded. The private investigator found at least 3 other women who'd lent him significant amounts of money. One lost her house because she'd used it as collateral for a loan he never repaid. That's criminal, Maria said, her voice sharp with anger. It should be, I agreed. But the law treats financial abuse like a civil matter instead of the crime it really is. Women lose everything and then get blamed for being stupid enough to trust someone they loved. The conversation continued long after we'd finished dessert. We talked about starting a nonprofit, maybe partnering with existing domestic violence organizations, creating resources that address the financial recovery aspect of leaving abusive relationships. By the time everyone left, we had the skeleton of a business plan sketched out on my dining room table. 2 weeks later, a package arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was the microphone from Lena's engagement party, the one she'd used to humiliate me in front of our entire family. Underneath it was a handwritten note on her monogrammed stationery. Sarah, it read in her careful cursive, I've been listening to recordings of myself from that night. I heard what I said to you, how I said it, the way everyone laughed. I heard myself become someone I don't recognize. I don't know how to apologize for that, but I'm working on figuring it out. I hope someday you let me try. L. I held the microphone for a long time, remembering the weight of those words, the laughter that had followed, the isolation I'd felt standing at the back of the garden. But the memory didn't have the same power over me anymore. It was just something that had happened, not something that defined me. I put the microphone in my closet and never thought about it again. The nonprofit became real faster than any of us expected. Elise's media attention had connected us with other women who'd survived financial abuse, with lawyers who worked pro bono, with therapists who specialized in economic recovery. We called it Foundation. Simple, strong, suggesting both new beginnings and solid ground to build on. Our first client was a woman named Patricia whose husband had systematically destroyed her credit over 15 years of marriage. She came to our office, a small suite above a coffee shop downtown, carrying a banker's box full of financial documents and a story that sounded depressingly familiar. I don't know where to start, she said, tears streaming down her face. He took out credit cards in my name, forged my signature on loans, even stole my identity to open accounts I didn't know existed. I have negative $200,000 in net worth and no idea how to fix it. Elise walked her through the legal options while I helped her create a basic budget and identify immediate safety concerns. It was the first time I'd felt truly useful in years. Not just helping someone grade papers or organize their classroom, but actually changing the trajectory of someone's life. 6 months after the rehearsal dinner that changed everything, I ran into Mom at the grocery store. She looked older, smaller somehow, her hair grown out and streaked with more gray than I remembered. We stood in the cereal aisle, both holding shopping baskets, neither quite sure what to say. You look good, she said finally. Happy. I am happy. The work you're doing with that organization, I saw the article in the Tribune. I'm proud of you. It was the first time she'd said those words to me about anything that mattered. I waited for the rush of validation I'd been craving my entire life, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt something quieter, more solid, the knowledge that I didn't need her approval anymore. Thank you, I said. That means something. We hugged briefly, awkwardly, and went our separate ways. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, and it wasn't reconciliation, but it was something, acknowledgement maybe, that we'd both learned things about ourselves that night. Elise and I met for coffee every Tuesday now, but we rarely talked about David anymore. Instead, we discussed foundation bylaws and grant applications, shared stories about the women we were helping, planned workshops on financial literacy and legal rights. We'd gone from being 2 women destroyed by the same man to being partners in something larger than our individual healing. The morning I finished writing the first draft of my book. Part memoir, part practical guide for women leaving financially abusive relationships. I realized I could walk into any room without flinching. Not because I'd gotten revenge on the people who'd hurt me, but because I'd transformed that hurt into something useful. Some stories don't end with apologies or comeuppances. They end with the quiet satisfaction of work that matters, relationships built on honesty instead of performance, and the bone-deep knowledge that you've become someone who can't be easily broken again. That was enough. That was everything. If this story of truth and transformation had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Elise walked into that rehearsal dinner with legal documents, completely changing everything. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.